On today's podcast,
my name is Courtney Geels, and I'm running for United States Congress, District 4 in North Carolina.
The truth is, adding value will never go out of style. Hello, and thanks for joining us for another Five Things podcast. Today I've got a very special guest, a future congresswoman. I think woman's the correct term, but certainly don't want to be offensive. Courtney Geels. Geels, right?
That's right, Courtney
just like
Geels.
It sounds. I sounded really country right there when I said that for some reason. So, any case, thanks for joining us today. And tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and what you're excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. I do identify as a woman.
Okay.
My name is Courtney Geels, and I'm running for United States Congress, District 4 in North Carolina. Okay. I grew up in Hillsborough, North Carolina, and I now live in Durham. So Orange County and Durham County are part of my district, and then we have Person, Alamance, and Granville County. It's a whirlwind of a story as to how I got into this, but I went from being an emergency room nurse to running for U.S. Congress kind of all in the past year. So it's been an interesting ride, a very big change in life, but it's been good. It's been hard, but there's a lot in there. So ask me questions.
What ultimately, what kind of triggered you to think about running for Congress?
I would say that there's two big things that got me into this, and they're both probably the most polarizing subjects in our country right now. Yeah. And one of those is related to the 2020 election. So my husband is a CPA. He has done mostly financial audits with public accounting for most of his career, and he was at a large CPA firm. He was realizing that the larger the firm, really the worse the quality product for his client was. The larger the firm got, the more there was the bureaucracy within the firm, the more you had to go way up top to make any decisions or innovate. And so he and a partner wanted to start their own business. So he quit his job about a week before the election to start a new business 2 months later. So he happened to have this great 2-month window of time off. And he was Googling, what happened overnight in the election. We all kind of saw this big shift in about 5 states. Where
it just stopped suddenly?
Yeah, 2 a.m., we just see 5 states all stop counting and decide, I think we're going to pause for this water leak in Georgia, that was, 5 miles away. And so he was just a little confused, just like most of America, as we were seeing this big shift and wanted to know more. And so he's Googling it. And I think we've all seen how a lot of social media has censored things, but I think our biggest concern starting then was Google, because people think, you're looking up a search engine and you think you're getting facts and you think you're just searching a word, but really you're getting what Google wants you to get from your question. And he couldn't find any people looking into the election. And he's like, I'm definitely not the only person in America looking this up. And he's venting to me about the subject. And again, I'm still nursing at this point. This is, November 2020. I'm working in the hospital. So my best friend from nursing school, her mother-in-law, is a United States Congresswoman in Illinois. And so I just texted my friend and said, hey, does your mother-in-law know anyone working on the election? My husband has 2 months off. He'll count ballots, do whatever y'all need, but he does do data analytics for a living. And 3 days later, he gets a call from the chief of staff in the White House and says, hey, how can you help us? And
so that was Mark Meadows.
Yeah, Mark Meadows called my husband's cell phone. And so pretty quickly he got plugged into Georgia. So I was actually a travel nurse. I'm from North Carolina, but I met my husband in Seattle. And so we were actually in Seattle. I lived there for 3 years. And so he's doing all this stuff from Seattle related to the Georgia election, which is totally crazy. And here I am running in Congress in North Carolina. So some people get kind of confused with the geography. Right. But again, November 2020, and he ended up working on really voter registration data in Georgia. And he found about 100,000 votes that were either blatantly illegal per Georgia law or irregular enough, or he would say it against nature, like looking at time stamps that were backwards, or say you received and accepted a ballot before it was ever mailed out, or an undeliverable address per the USPS data set that was a mail-in vote that was counted, things that just don't really make sense. So there's a lot of data behind the case. It was the Trump versus Raffensperger case. He ended up being the lead data expert on that. It was kind of crazy time for us because he couldn't talk about it because it was a lawsuit. Sure. And a lot of people heard about a phone call that was leaked to the Washington Post illegally by Raffensperger that said that Trump was trying to pressure him for votes. But really, that phone call was a settlement phone call because the judicial system was pushing it out for a month and not assigning a judge. And so this phone call was really Trump saying, hey, let's settle the case. I want you to sit down with my expert and work out the control issues in your own data. And so that was supposed to be the settlement. So they flew my husband down to Georgia. And by the time he landed, instead of settling the case, Raffensperger leaked the phone call to the Washington Post. And so it was assigned a judge, and he was supposed to testify in court on January 8th, and we all saw what happened January 6th. And so it was voluntarily dismissed by Trump as it was a Trump lawsuit. So unfortunately, there was this, huge mountain that we're like just going up, and then the climax is like really boring, Nobody ever heard the information. And so we've just been very passionate about election integrity, seeing how, again, he would say if you looked at a financial audit and you had this bad a lack of controls, you would just never let the business continue doing what they're doing. And we're basing bad controls, basing a presidential election on that.
And I guess from my point of view, there were so many what I consider red flags. And it's in my opinion, it's from my point of view, it's not a sore loser kind of a thing. It's just there's so many questionable things that happened. And, I'll talk to friends that were happy with the outcome, and they would say something like, hey, this has been thrown out left and right in court. It hasn't been heard, this and that. And I say, well, when someone alleges a crime, you don't go straight to court. Someone needs to investigate the crime and then present the evidence. I don't feel like we ever had somebody investigating the crimes. And when I'm seeing things being investigated, like in Yuma, I'm seeing people getting nailed and going to jail, or at least being prosecuted. So from my point of view, and I don't want to steal your story because I'm far more interested in what you're saying, it's just we don't have a free country if we don't have free elections. I want secure elections, period. I want everybody to get their vote, and I want every vote to be real. I don't know why there's any controversy about that. I really don't.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. And ultimately, his lawsuit was just proving doubt because really they were just wanting to not certify that Georgia election so that it could be investigated. Because ultimately, it needed to have a lawsuit that there was actually people investigating whether things were right or wrong. And ultimately, all he had to prove was doubt in the margin of victory. And so the margin of victory was about 12,000 votes.
Right.
I mean, that's not many votes in a presidential election in a state. And he found about 100,000 votes. So it was very clearly proving doubt. It was not proving fraud. He always likes me to make sure people know that fraud implies intent. And so we couldn't prove intent based on the data that he had, but we could prove doubt. And so, when you talk about this shouldn't be, a partisan issue. We had Democrat friends that very clearly voted for Biden that read over his report and were very concerned, and they were in tech fields. They would go and tell their bosses, and the bosses would say, you should stop talking about this. And so, our friends would just be shocked. Like, everyone needs to know about this. Everyone needs to read this report. We have to look into this stuff because, like you said, it's not we can't protect the vote, as the Democrats want to say, if we don't know that you're somebody else's vote that's not a real person. It's not canceling out your vote.
Right. And
so really for us to protect the vote, we have to have good controls over our elections, and that should be a bipartisan effort.
I agree 100%. It's like this thing that, if you don't have an ID, you should still be able to vote. The case that the people that say that don't want voter ID is they don't want to alienate or disenfranchise the voter. But when we allow fraudulent votes or wrong votes into the election, well, you're taking away my vote, which is the same thing as not allowing somebody to vote. So I want every citizen to be able to vote.
Right, me too.
To me, it seems like a very simple fix. I just don't think there's political will there, which to me, again, maybe sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but if there are simple solutions that are not being applied, my logic is there's a reason. And what is the reason? Well, it's speculation. But, I think being in sales, being a business owner, I think one of the things that I've had to do in sales, especially 25 years now, is when I'm speaking with a client and I'm talking to them, I'm listening. There's things that they say, there's things that they do, and I'm picking up on things along the way. And the election, from my point of view, there were so many things that were red flags in my mind. When there's the leak that never happened, there's the vote that just stopped. Georgia, you get the video of people literally rolling out boxes of ballots from under a table.
Right. We have this video footage and nobody's talking about it.
It's on video. And the thing that was super sketchy to me is that there was Facebook fact checking on it within like 24 or 48 hours on what those videos were. Number one, how do you know so fast? And then the fact checking didn't make any sense.
Oh yeah, I've been fact checked like immediately when I post things. Sometimes I'm like, oh, you already fact checked that? Like 10 seconds after I post it? I think a computer is fact checking me.
Right.
I used a word they don't like.
Right. And so, it shouldn't be, the other point I want to bring up, it shouldn't be, people would say, you should stop talking about this. We should be able to talk about anything in this country. Mm-hmm. We can talk about people's rights, what they think they should be entitled to, all this kind of stuff. And it's okay to talk about what some people want to talk about. We should be able to talk about anything in this country. So it's actually sad that it's frowned upon if you're talking about something.
Well, I think it's ultimately related to the word injustice. That's been one of the words that's just been reoccurring for me in language and also just in politics. And I think as a Christian, like I want justice in all things. So right. I want, when we talk about racial injustice, like I don't believe that's okay. But are certain people using these key terms, racial injustice, to promote something that's not just? And I think you could even apply that to this election stuff when you talk about voter ID. And I would rather solve the problem. If there's people that don't have a birth certificate, that can't get an ID, if there really are people there, I'd love as their representative to come work with them and get them some form of ID. I want to solve problems, but I also want them to feel confident that their vote counts and that it's one vote, one person, and we're really electing our officials. Because anyone I talk to that's of my mindset, if Joe Biden was elected by the people, great. That gives me confidence in our system. But right now I don't have confidence in our system.
And I can honestly say I don't have confidence. And what you just said a second ago, I made a social media post a long time ago. I posted, if anybody knows a citizen out there that doesn't have an ID, please let me know. I would like to get involved to help them get an ID. Because these people can't participate in society without an ID.
Right.
You're not flying, you're not getting Obamacare, you're not getting health care, you're not getting a wide range of things that you deserve and should have access to. Right. So, and again, not calling out Republicans, although I consider myself an umpire. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I just call balls and strikes. Mm-hmm. But being a business owner and a marketing guy, if I were involved in the Republican Party, I would have a campaign that we want to help you get your ID. I would be marketing that. We're the good guys. We want to help solve the problems. Mm-hmm. So if there are people that can't vote because of an ID, we're going to spend money. We're going to spend time and energy to make sure your voice is heard. That would be such a brilliant, number one, marketing for the Republican Party. I like that.
Make sure, I'm going to write it down. Make sure your voice is heard.
So if I was involved in the Republican Party, that's something I would say and promote. And when there's little or no people responding to that, then I'm going to come back to the point that, hey, we tried to help these mystery people that can't get IDs and can't vote. We've reached out. What have you done, Democrat Party? Mm-hmm. You keep saying they're out there. Why aren't you trying to help these folks?
Right.
Aren't we supposed to help our citizens as politicians? So that's just it's a marketing thing, but it's also
just true.
It makes me question the whole narrative.
Well, just the definition of a public servant, like politics has gotten, it's so dirty. I mean, I could talk about that all day, but
that's probably a whole podcast in itself.
Oh yes, for sure. But just even ultimately the idea of a representative, you really are supposed to be advocating for your people. And that really is where like my nursing comes in. But when, you have someone with a need, you should listen to them no matter what their complaint. And I'm really seeing where bipartisan, well, not bipartisan, it's just partisan politics, has really just affected whether a politician will even answer someone of another party or they'll ever vote against their own party. Because I believe when you talk about, negatively about Republicans, I think there's negative things you can say about both parties.
Sure.
Because ultimately they're all flawed people that, they need to work on themselves too.
I actually don't see things as much in terms of Republican and Democrat anymore. I actually see establishment, which I would call it the machine, which in my opinion includes the Department of Justice. It includes mainstream media. There's accepted narratives. There's accepted fake news. There's this accepted, and then there's these outsiders, which right. I would, like Tulsi Gabbard, for example. She's probably one of my favorite Democrats. And it's been interesting watching her come up as this young superstar. She's attractive. She's intelligent. She's a veteran. She's a woman, or she identifies as a woman. All of these things that were really positive traits. And then seeing her going from this up and coming to just being ousted, to where Hillary Clinton is calling her a Russian stooge and just losing the support of the Democrat Party for what? Because she was advocating for citizens?
Right.
And I got the impression, without knowing a ton of detail, I got the impression she was following her heart, what is right for the American citizens, and that did not bode well for her political career. I think you could say the same thing about Donald Trump. I think you could say the same thing about a lot of politicians. I think there's the machine, and I think that there's citizens trying to make a difference in their community. And so it's discouraging when you think about it like that.
Yeah, well, when you talk about establishment, you have this repetition of money and power. And when you're trying to take away an establishment's money and power, they don't like that.
Right.
And so they fight back. Right. And I hear that even listening to my Democrat opponents that were in their primary, they talked a lot about, dark money. They talked a lot about power. They talked a lot about the same things I talk about.
Sure.
And I think any of us newcomers really are... And I will just throw out there, my opponent, I would call the least newcomer of even all the Democrat opponents that were running. She's been in Orange County politics for, I think, about 30 years in different roles. And so when you talk about establishment, it's like she's just working her way up. And I've heard she's a very nice lady, but ultimately, are we just feeding, the monster by adding more establishment politicians to Congress,
right,
and seeing where people are just going to check the box of their party because their majority or their minority leader is saying, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to follow suit or we're going to kick you out. And when that's not representing your constituents, because
right.
you have Republican, you have Democrat, and in my district, you have so much diversity of thought and of people and of ethnicities. There's no way you can check the box for either party all the time. You have to get to know your people and what's best for them. And that's the whole point of the House of Representatives. The Senate might be able to be a little more cut and dry because it's representing the whole state, but the House of Representatives is representing the people of your district, and you have to listen to them.
Yeah, and there's so many different directions I think we can go on this topic,
right.
But for time's sake, we'll keep it a little cleaner. But one thing, let's see, before we get into the 5 things, one of the things I'm guilty of is probably paying attention to national things more than I am local things. And that's something I'm not proud of. That's something I'm working to get better at. But, if you ask the average person, who the VP of sales is, or VP of sales, who the vice president of the country is, who the speaker of the house is, I think you're going to get a lot more people that know those things. But if you said, who's the congressperson in your district, I think if you ask that to the average person, if I had to take a guess, I mean, it's 10-20% of the people
right.
know. I like to consider myself pretty aware, and there are times where I didn't know, and probably didn't care as much as I should have. So I think it's really important to get involved in local politics, whether you like politics or not. I think you got to take the time to get educated. So basically, there's a lot of things that need to be addressed, and you're going to talk about 5 things today that are close to your heart. The one thing I did want to mention is I looked up some stuff. I didn't know who your opponent was. I see she's been in the North Carolina Senate for like 9 years or something like that, which, again, kind of to our point, it kind of turns me off a little bit. There's one part of it where it's like, experience is good, but I'm a huge proponent of term limits. And we can always agree to disagree. That's we when we first sat down and had a conversation, I like finding topics to disagree about because that's how I think you grow. And if we disagree on something, you're going to shed some light, and I might change my perspective a little bit. It might not go 180, but it might move a little bit. So the one thing that I saw that was a concern for me and why I want to help you even more is that the primaries, there seems to be a lot more people voting in the primaries for Democrats than there are Republicans.
There are.
Obviously, it's part of your challenge is getting your name out there and branding and that sort of thing. It seems like from a really ignorant point of view, maybe is the word, not really looking at that before, it seems like there's more activity on one side than the other at this point. What would you say about that? What do you think about that kind of thing?
That was a little bit discouraging, but at the same time, as far as the Republican turnout in my district was what I expected it to be. Okay. Historically. So I wasn't as disappointed. I think my husband, he's an analytics guy, so he's just, pulling his hair out like, where are the Republicans? And, I just recently, it was a couple days ago, I was looking specifically at Alamance County, and Alamance County historically has been a red county. And so they're not used to being brought into this District 4 world where it's mostly Democrat. Whereas if you look at like Orange and Durham County, they've pretty much historically always been blue. Mm-hmm. They're more city, more populated, but Alamance County has a lot of population. And so when I looked at their Democrat turnout for their primary, it's terrible. It's about 4,000 people. But if you look at their even midterm general elections, it's like 20 to 30,000 people that turn out. Okay. So they're not as participatory in a red county as they would be, in a blue county. And I think that kind of follows what the historical leaning is. So people are like, well, what's the point of me going out into a primary if we're just going to lose our general? And so you have to really motivate the base. Mm-hmm. They talk about the base being a lot of people who vote in the primary, but really you have to create a larger base. And that, when I say you, I mean me. Mm-hmm. Sure. My husband and I joke about when he says, we need to do something, I'll be like, that means I need to do it. So ultimately, it's my job to really motivate every Republican to go out and vote in the general. Mm-hmm. And right now, I think Republicans are ready to go vote. They're ready for change. Democrats aren't as motivated to go vote because their president is not doing the best job we've seen in history. And so it's challenging to look at those numbers, but I also see the patterns of like what historically motivates people to go and vote. And I think that why vote in a primary? You might go vote in the general because you want to get your voice out there for your party, but you're not necessarily going to spend your time going and voting in a primary that you think you're going to lose the general.
And I can see a lot of people not voting in the primary, especially if you're not taking the time to really dig into the two candidates going at it. Whereas I think that the general is obviously more important and more impactful. Mm-hmm. In terms of turnout, I don't know how everybody doesn't feel things going badly between the inflation, between obviously the gas prices. And I've got a lot of people I see out there defending the Biden administration about gas prices. I'm actually going to do a video because I'm so tired of seeing it. Yes,
and they're defending the interest rates too. And they're just saying, oh, they had to do this. I'm like, but why did they have to do it? Right. Because they've been spending. Right. So they need to refill their tank of money from the American people because they decided to shell it out to Ukraine or, in stipends that we didn't necessarily need. Right. I think that the money printing and spending has really just created this problem.
It's out of control. And so there's all these things going that in principle, I like to come back to what you said before. I don't care who the party is. I'm not for large central government. You look at historically, anybody that gets too much power, you could say Putin right now. Mm-hmm. Anybody that has the more centralized the power, the bigger the government, the smaller the citizen. Yep. I would rather see the states have more power like we were founded as a traditional republic. And I think when you get central power, just like with a large corporation, like a lot of our competition, you deal with a big company like a Time Warner, you're going to get a certain level of service. Whereas
Right.
if you deal with a smaller company, as long as they're a good smaller company, you get people.
Right.
And they'll look you eye to eye. Whereas the big companies, they can just, that's our manager, that's our policy, get you off the phone.
Yeah.
So
But it's important. People need to realize, like, if they think about, say, their state House rep, so they have the smallest district as far as the legislature, the state Senate has a larger district. So you think about your state House rep would be, equal to what I'm doing on the national level. If we really did decrease the power of the federal government across the board, doesn't matter what party's in control.
Right.
If you really feel like your taxes are going to be higher in your state taxes and the control is in the state, you can go directly to that state House rep who, in theory, can know almost all of their constituents because
Right.
they have time to call all of them. They have time to answer their questions. And if the control is in the state, then the people ultimately have a voice in what's going on in their state.
but if it's central,
Right.
they're off in a distant land making decisions that impact us all.
Right.
So we're on the same page with that. Less central power. And so we'll kind of wander into the 5 things that there's basically, you've come up with the 5 biggest reasons to get out the vote and support you. What would the first one be? Thanks for joining us again for another 5 Things podcast. You might have noticed that we're in a different change of clothes. So I'll explain what happened because this is a good success principle. I could easily say that, we're coming back for our second day to finish the podcasting. But the truth of the matter is Courtney's camera ran out of battery. So a good successful principle is this was our first podcast where I ever actually did it essentially on my own. So I made a mistake. So when you start something, you don't have to, success happens when you're learning along the way. This was a good success tip. You don't have to have it all figured out to start. And wisdom comes from mistakes a lot of times. So I'm a little bit better podcaster today than I was the first time we shot this. So thanks for coming back, Courtney.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to be here, Brian.
And we're essentially just going to jump right into the 5 things because we had everything. I was pretty sure people didn't want to see my ugly mug for the last, 5 things with just you talking. But we're going to go ahead and jump into the 5 things. And number 1, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to change my order just because one of my very top priorities is always promoting truth. And so I really like that idea of confessing when you do something not quite right.
Sure.
So we already started with that, which is awesome.
right.
But yeah, just going kind of deeper into that, I think that a lot of America on both sides of the aisle politically are really concerned about not knowing what is truth right now. They watch the media, they change channels, they go on different podcasts, and they're trying to investigate on their own what is truth. And so one of my top priorities is really preventing censorship. I think to have a free America, we need free speech. And I know that's been talked a lot about, but it used to be really a huge point on the Democrat platform. You heard that mostly from Democratic candidates, this freedom of speech issue. And now we're really hearing that a lot from Republicans. But ultimately,
You lost the bet.
I lost it. You want to explain?
Well, one of the things that you don't realize until you start doing a podcast is how many times you say things, or like, people that impersonate Barack Obama, for example, will do the in between. And one of the things I have to work on is saying, And so that's one of the things I'm paying attention to when I'm talking. So Courtney and I both say the words ultimately. It's like
way too much.
It's a transition in thought is what it is. We have a thought, and then ultimately, or at the end of the day, is something I say
It's like
a lot.
you're summing it up.
Right.
Yeah.
So we made a bet because I say ultimately a lot as well. So she already lost the bet. So
I lost it, but I was also talking longer.
Right. That's true. That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you can go ahead and start.
So the thing that I would really like to do when it comes to action items, people ask, you said as well. See, look, we're going to start paying attention to our words now. But I think that a lot of people want to know what a politician is going to do. If they're elected, what are you actually going to do? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's been talked about a lot is Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, which was actually supposed to promote free speech. It was passed along the time that Facebook and MySpace, if anybody remembers MySpace, was out. So it was supposed to protect the tech companies from having to worry about liability on what was said on their platform. And so it was supposed to promote the fact that they didn't need to worry about censoring someone if they did something that was illegal, which we know lots of things are done illegally on social media sites, lots of sex trafficking, drug trafficking, a lot of bad things. And actually, I have family who work for the FBI that, they use social media to actually track down people. So it's a really good tool to use. And so even promoting these things, the pushback might be, well, we don't want hate speech, or we don't want these things like sex trafficking happening on social media platforms. So shouldn't we censor that and not let it happen? Well, it's going to happen either way. People are going to have code words for different things. But if we censor free speech, we're also preventing truth from being promoted and told. And so there's always two sides to every coin, every argument, every relationship that has issues. There's always two sides to everything. And so it should be up to the American people to decide what they believe to be true. I do believe that there is ultimate, and that I mean ultimate truth. There's right and wrong. And that kind of goes into my second, I would say, big 5 things of what pushes me to run, what I want to do, what values I hold. And there's a lot of Republican candidates that say that they're America first. And I think that there's a lot you can talk about being America first, but I really like to say that I'm God first, because I am a Christian, and I get some pushback where people say, you talk about your Christianity too much. But you really have to know what a person's worldview is to really know where they stand on things. We have so many people, again, on both sides that get irritated at the person that they elected because they change their mind or they do something different than what they said they were going to do. And I think that really is based on a worldview issue. So if you view the world as a Christian and the Bible is true and God is in control and he makes the rules and there's ultimate truth, then there is a right and wrong that's very objective. And so when you talk about different problems in our society, you can actually boil things down to right and wrong, and you can also boil things down to, is something actually true, or is that someone thinking it's their, what they perceive to be true? There's a lot of worldview issues when it comes to these things, and we can talk about so many political topics that I can bring that topic into.
Well, I think you got to know somebody's moral compass. To me, that's when I look at somebody that's running for office, I kind of look at it in the same respect that when I go into a restaurant, I don't really need to know what the manager's, if I like him or not. Does he run is he treating employees good? Did I have a good experience in the restaurant? Was the food good? Was the music not too loud? Was the staff professional and well-trained? Those are the things that I'm more concerned about versus likability. And one of the, I would say, big beefs that I have talking to friends and it's like, well, I don't like him. What does that have anything to do with it, really? I mean, it does, because it's a brand, and that's just how people are. But for me personally, it's I care more about policy than I do personality. And so, to your point, it's one of the things I like looking at is, what is this person's moral compass? What is their history? Do they flip-flop back and forth a lot? Because that just, to me, if I see that, it just tells me that they're self-serving because they're appeasing different groups, which is why they don't really have a moral compass. That's what I take away from that.
And I would even use the word self-serving. I think that all goes back to the same word, worldview. Is I've been talking to people that I would say are in the opposition compared to me, someone who doesn't believe exactly what I believe related to policy. And I'm generally finding out that their worldview is the idea that people are ultimately good, and I really mean ultimately, and by the definition,
right, that
we have a few bad eggs, but people are generally good people. And then there's the opposing view, which I would say I hold, is that God created everything perfectly, and now there's the fall of sin. And so we are all sinful and ultimately selfish. And when you think of someone's soul as always being self-serving, we have to make laws to prevent that selfishness from getting out of control,
Right.
is how I would say it.
Right.
And so that's why we do have laws. That's why we enforce those laws. That's why we have checks and balances on our federal government, which I would lead into as being my third big point, is wanting to decrease the power of the federal government. We look back at the Constitution and we see where our founding fathers have so many checks and balances, even down to, you think, the local level and the way the states are maintained and the way they do their own state constitutions. Is there's so many different levels of government, and that's intentional. And we should give those powers to the powers that be. And the idea of executive orders in the federal level, to me, is not constitutional. I Googled it the other day. I was like, am I missing something? Is there something that gives the President of the United States the power to make executive orders that can then be enforced and implemented? No, it's not there. But somehow we've just gotten used to that. And we have presidents, and that's Trump and Biden and Obama. Like, every single president is doing it. And they're going in and they're undoing the last person's executive orders. And so we're seeing these dramatic shifts in between presidents. But that's not how our Constitution was founded. It was actually supposed to stay pretty even. It was supposed to be challenging to pass a new law so that we didn't see these huge fluctuations, especially in the economy.
Well, it's Congress's job. It's the House of Representatives and the Senate to create the laws.
Right.
It's the executive branch to enforce the law. And it's the Supreme Court's job to interpret the law.
To interpret the law, not legislate.
Right. So, to your point, it's like the executive orders are out of control. And again, it's being a principled person. I don't care if it's Obama, Biden, or Trump, or Bush. Right. I don't want them doing it. Your job is to enforce.
Right.
If you think something needs to be changed, it's your job to rally the troops and get a new law on the books.
Right.
And that's a healthy republic in action.
Right.
We're not a democracy.
Yeah, and that we probably should discuss.
I'm sure we'll get into that.
The republic versus democracy, because apparently we're trying to infringe democracy.
Well, and it's the people. Here's the thing, not to steal your thunder if you were going into this, but people that want central power, more power, they're going to promote being a democracy. George Bush used to say that, and it would drive me nuts. It's like, why is this guy saying that we're a democracy? We were founded as a constitutional republic. Well, if you want more central power, democracy is the way to go, because there's the old saying. It's I don't know. I wish I could give credit to who I got it from, but they said democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner, and that's not fair to the sheep.
It's not fair to the minority. Right.
And so republic spreads the power over the states, which is what I like. It's let the states decide. You want to do what you do in California versus what they do in, I don't know, Colorado or Nevada or some other state. Do it. And people can migrate to the state that best suits their needs. I think that's a wonderful scenario. That way you can encompass everybody in America, kind of get the state that matches their ideology the best. Which is why
you can move around easily.
Which is why you see people fleeing California for places like Texas and Florida. You see people fleeing the Northeast. We're in North Carolina. I mean, we're half the people that are moving here, New Yorkers and Californians and Pennsylvania and stuff like that. So, I just think that's a good sign of the state and we've got a Democrat governor. I didn't vote for him, but overall, there's only a few criticisms I have of him overall. So, but then again, I'm not as involved in local. Anyway, back to what we're talking about here.
I think it's important, even just this concept of this big government mentality of when you're talking about democracy versus republic. And I think you bring it back to that moral worldview. I think you could argue the reason why you'd want decentralizing of power, and there's twofold. And one of that's a moral argument of, are people ultimately selfish? And that would be what my belief is. And I would say, yes, they are. So why would you want to give a small group or an individual too much power? They're going to use it for themselves.
Power corrupts.
We all see that historically.
History, over and over and over again. So that the bigger the government, the smaller the citizen.
Right. And we see, and I hear that complaint with Democrats and Republicans that all these people that have been in Congress for so long, or the presidency, that there's all this power grabbing and money grabbing. And I hear that constantly. And I think we're all in agreement that we want to bring that power down to the people. And so that would be my moral argument. But then we even have just this logical argument of anybody who's been part of big business. So one of the drivers that even led me to running for Congress was related to my husband and myself being part of large, I would call it, businesses. And his was in the CPA world. He was in a very large international CPA firm. I was in a multi-campus hospital in the Pacific Northwest. And both of us were noticing the same trend. There was these high-level administrators making decisions that were affecting their product. So for me, it was patient care. So I would see hospital administrators looking at the data, looking at their budget, and looking at how can we profit and where can we move money around to actually make us profitable, rather than going down to that patient care level and following a nurse, looking at the process and figuring out how can we cut costs that actually helps the patient and make things work better.
Or without sacrificing too much quality.
Quality, yes,
right.
Exactly. And you see that. And unfortunately, in the healthcare world, that's like, again, another topic for another day. But in the healthcare world, it's even hard in a small hospital system to even do that well, because you need all the resources of a large hospital system. So it's more challenging to figure out those checks and balances in the hospital realm. But when the CPA world, it's almost a perfect mirror of exactly how the federal government issues are today, is what my husband experiences, wanting to innovate at this, he was at a manager level, and so people that are in the CPA world, there's associate, there's seniors, there's managers, there's partners, and they go on up the chain. And especially in a large firm, you have multiple levels of partners. So he likes to bring technology into the CPA world, which is pretty old school right now. So for him to innovate and bring what he knows about technology and make a more efficient, more quality product for the client, he had to just cross, leaps and bounds to even talk to the right person. And then actually implementing any of that was almost impossible. So you think if you mirror that to, and now he started his own business and it's a whole lot better product, better client relationship, sure. Exactly what you would think. But what we've just noticed with the federal government is you centralize that power and they start making decisions that affect every single day Americans. I mean, something like the mandates, when we talk about COVID mandates, I don't like to get too far on a tangent there again, because I think we can talk about that all day.
It's probably a whole nother podcast.
It's definitely a whole nother podcast. But even when you think of a federal level person making a decision for a whole country, when you think, I have one of my best friends lives in the middle of Illinois, where there's like 500 people amongst, 200 miles of driving. Do they need to all wear masks? Do they all need to be vaccinated to protect other people? It's an illogical argument to make from a federal level. Now, does the Durham mayor, should they be making, a decision that affects all of Durham? Maybe. It's very close proximity. They may need to, New York City, any of these close proximities, they may need to make different decisions than rural Illinois does. But for the federal level to be making decisions that affect the entire country when it comes to COVID precautions, you can argue that's a pandemic, but it's still this centralized power that's now affecting every single American, no matter what their daily life looks like.
Sure. No, I mean, that's very fair. It's running the country is not a one size fits all, because everything is different across the country for sure.
Or education. I mean, you can go down all of these paths when it comes to the federal government deciding what curriculum needs to say, what exactly each math person needs to teach at different schools. They all need to be on a same general level. But again, that's the power of the states. It's not given to the federal government. So why don't we look, you might have a group that's a private group that sets different testing standard scores. We know that they already exist, where each state can adopt those type of standards, where they can compare how North Carolina is doing to California. But let the states decide that, and let the people decide which state they want to live in and how well the children are doing and how well they're succeeding. And let that be measured. I mean, it's a very obvious practice. So I just see where our federal government, if you look at the way it was founded, Congress was actually only supposed to meet twice a year. That's all that's required in the Constitution. And now they meet twice a month for a whole week at a time. So we see just where we need to decrease the power of the federal government.
Well, we're definitely on the same page with that. And what's interesting, last note on that, is Republican or Democrat, like when I talk to some people that are so supposedly anti-establishment, they're supposedly anti-big corporation, but then they do all these things that are like pushing that agenda. And it's like, do you even like understand what you're doing? What you're saying you're against, you're actually promoting.
Right. We're hurting small business right now with regulation, especially.
No question about it. And when you have a lot of regulation, big business loves that because they can afford to have staff of 8 lawyers on staff. I can't pay lawyers to sit around full time.
Right.
So regulation hurts the little guy. Do we need some regulation? Absolutely.
Right. For safety precautions.
For safety and quality service for the public and so forth. But there's that balance, and the more regulation, when it becomes cumbersome, that's where it benefits the big companies and hurts the little guys.
And you can actually do that privately. So you think like CPA world, there's I think it's AICPA that my husband's a part of. There's these corporate bodies, but they are more private. They're not a governmental body. They're the professionals getting together and saying, what is the best level of service we need to give our clients? And then expecting these certifications to cover all of these different things that we want to make sure we're giving a good quality audit. Or with nursing or with physicians, the orthopedic physicians should decide how best to do a total knee. Why should a politician with either the CDC or Medicaid or Medicare, why should they decide how a total knee should be done or what products they should be able to do or how expensive it should be? Shouldn't that just be the Association of Orthopedic Physicians? And that's a private group. You don't need a governmental body to increase that quality. People see it for themselves. If they're getting a bunch of infections at one hospital, they're going to go to a different hospital.
Yeah. I can just say that always the worst service I ever get from anyone is government number 1.
Yeah.
Big business number 2. And then, everybody else kind of falls after that.
Yep, I agree. So along one of these lines was parent choice. One of the things that's really driving me, it wasn't the thing that started running, how I felt when I was running for Congress and the things that I really was most passionate about. But the more I've really gotten to know how education is going, especially just in my district, like you look at Durham in comparison to Orange County and you see the test scores and you see how school boards aren't really listening to parents. And there's this constant, it seems like they're almost at war with each other. Well, when you look at these things that aren't working and you say, why aren't they working? Well, you kind of say, follow the money with everything that you notice. And what I've noticed with education, it doesn't even matter what my position is on what should be taught in school, what shouldn't be taught in school. It definitely shouldn't be decided by the federal government. And what we're seeing is these very large grants that are being given, usually disguised as COVID relief grants. But there's all these strings attached as to what needs to be taught. And there's a lot of this diversity, equity, inclusion stuff that's being pushed. We see it pushed in the military. We see it being pushed on education. Well, anytime the federal government has their hand in something monetarily, they can decide what's being pushed. And
push the agenda. Right. You want the money, you got to do this.
Right, exactly.
I was reading an article about the part of the Build Back Better, Build Back Greener, or something like that. And it was saying that the Biden administration allocated $50 billion. And it was an article in the New York Times about how it's going to benefit the wealthier counties because they know how to write for the grants and get things.
Interesting.
Which is not really fair for the counties that are not doing as good.
Right.
But it was basically that you got to qualify for the grant. So there's all this money out there and you got to abide by what they're saying to get the money.
And people don't always even know that they need to apply to that. We see that even in North Carolina with opportunity scholarships. There's these scholarships available for lower income children to be able to go to private school. But do all these parents know that that's an opportunity for them? Literally an opportunity scholarship? Probably not. And actually, right. I know not, because I've talked to people that work in the state legislature that will say, oh, there's a lot of these available that parents just don't even know to apply to get one of those scholarships. And so we see with, like you said, these grants, it's like, do the people that actually need the help, are they getting the help, or is it just being given to people who don't actually need it? And so people say again, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, I have an idea that's been kind of thrown around, but I would say, the word extreme is not always looked, upon friendly, but I'm pretty extreme in what I would like to do because I think it would completely overturn what our current education system looks like. It wouldn't necessarily look different on the ground, like when you're at school, but just the way everything works. And right now, what I've been learning about the federal government is it actually seems to be, instead of per child, they're distributing money, they're giving it in different specific amounts. Say something like Title I, which helps lower income families, like getting the free lunch program. But what we see with that is recently Biden has actually said that he is going to remove free lunches from any public school or anyone that receives, it's really Title I funding, if they don't implement the transgender bathroom policies. So you think, who is going to say, I'm going to take free food from a poor child ever? No, everyone's just going to comply to that. But does that match, again, the values and the moral compass of everyone in America?
Of course not.
Absolutely not, especially these very, very red states. Now, we live in a state that would choose that at, a local level. I would definitely say when I talk to people in Orange County, the majority of people would actually want to implement that. And at the local level, I don't necessarily agree with it, but let the people decide.
If locally they decide to do that,
that's fine. But you go to Johnston County, I can tell you Johnston County is not going to vote for that.
Right.
And so for the federal government to be implementing these things with money, again, we're going back to that third point, but back to education, what do you do about it? Well, the parents are never going to be heard. You could have every single parent in Wake County go to the school board meeting, and they're not going to listen to them if there's $20 million being thrown at them. But if you reallocate the money federally to the parents in the form of a voucher where, say it's $2,000 on average per child, that goes directly to the parent, not the money, but the voucher, and they can put that where they want their child to go to school. So whether that's a public school, private school, homeschool, there's a lot of people homeschooling their children, spending a whole lot of money and not being reimbursed for that. Or, a charter school. And there's different ways of organizing this. We could call it a tax deduction for some of these people. There's ways of reorganizing the idea federally. But in my extremeness of this, because I don't think that's really that extreme, most people could think, oh, yeah, that might work well. Well, I don't think it works the best unless you also have the state doing the same thing. And I know there's colleagues that I know that are running on the state level and they want to do the same thing. So I would really like to say federally, any money that's going to education is going to go in the form of a voucher to the parent, but we're not going to send any money to the states at all if the state does not match a voucher system for that family as well. So you think of a child, I think the average in North Carolina is around $10,000 per student, but if you look at Durham County, I think it's around $18,000 per student. So in whatever way the state decides to allocate those funds, they see where there's needs, whatever they deem price of living, these kind of issues, they need to send that in the form of a voucher to those parents. So then the parents can decide if they want their kid, they're paying the taxes too. They should be able to put their kid wherever they want in school. And then you think these issues like transgender bathrooms, or do we teach the genderbread person in school? Well, the parents are going to decide that. They're going to have churches that are going to start their own schools. Can you imagine if you had 10 third graders at your church and you have a qualified third grade teacher that goes to that church and they say, you know what, we have a whole lot of 8-year-olds here and we have a teacher and all those 8-year-olds have a $10,000 voucher. Well, we can surely pay this teacher. We can start our own school for third graders. And then, they'll expand that and we'll see these smaller class sizes, happier teachers, happier parents, and students that have these more geared toward what they need teachers. And I think it just helps everyone.
And it sounds like you could put your kids somewhere that is reflecting your home values,
right?
Whatever those values are.
Right.
And the thing I want to bring up here is that I'm real big on principles. So you might like the fact that the government is saying you can get this money if you abide by X because you like X. I don't like the principle. I don't care what X is. I don't think the government should be dictating that type of thing.
Right.
And you might, let's say you're listening to this, you might be happy with that, but would you be happy the next president that gets in or the next Congress and Senate that power swings back the other way and they want to tie the fact that you need to have religion classes in your school to get this money.
Yeah.
So if you're outraged about one but not about the other, you're not a principled, you're not looking at things with principle. And so I would encourage you to look at the system, look at the process. I don't like the process. Don't push your agenda holding our money
Public
hostage.
Money.
It's
Right.
our money. It's not, it's the federal government. It's our money.
Right.
And so don't hold us hostage to your agenda for our money that we're putting into the system to provide these products and services. So,
and additionally, on the same topic of just school choice or parent choice, however you want to look at it, I would say one thing that actually doesn't sound as Republican of me, but I think it's a need. And when you listen to your constituents and you see problems with crime, that's something I hear all the time is how do we, help with this gun violence or crime issue?
It's not defunding the police. I can tell you that right now.
It's not defunding the police. But I also look at okay, why are these things happening? And I can go into a lot of the whys, but one of the whys is lack of education. And so I hear that a lot in communities where there's a lot of these problems. And there's been a lot of throwing around community college being paid for potentially by the federal government. Well, whatever that allocated amount, let's say it's $2,000 per child, that's the average of what the federal government is spending on education. I would like to extend that for 2 years to any adult. And I would say, obviously, if someone is 17 years old, that would be a natural linear, you finish high school, you go to 2 years of community college if you'd like to use that. I would say that needs to be an application process. We're not just going to send these vouchers out and then just get lost in the mail.
Right.
But if someone requests a voucher to be able to be covered for 2 years of community college, I think that actually creates more of a tax base. So you think we're going to maybe spend a little more money, but now you have qualified welders, you have qualified respiratory therapists, you have qualified car mechanics, you have all these people with trades that can actually add to society, and they feel good about their work and they know how to do their work and they're making money. So if we're able to implement these vouchers at the community college level, we're going to have a lot more trained professionals, whether it's plumbers or it's electricians or respiratory therapists. And then we have even a larger tax base where people can have pride in their work, and they're also going to be more taxpayers. So when people push back and say, well, that's going to be a lot more expensive, well, you're going to have a lot more people in the workforce that are getting paid better money than they would at a minimum wage job, and they can enjoy their work and feel like they're adding to society. And I think that will actually decrease crime when we're talking about how do we, from a federal level, address crime other than, funding the police. But I would say that's just something that I think is one of those underlying why are we having these problems.
Sure. I think people, when they have opportunity, they're going to not turn to crime as much. And to your point, the trades, I know lots of tradespeople that do really well, but I don't know that, I don't know what kind of funding or kind of options there are for tradespeople. I know in the security industry, we have to train people. It's my expense. There's no school to teach you security, and there really should be.
Right.
Because it's a good industry. Same thing with like flooring contractors or a number of things. But I think when you have, it comes back to one of the sayings I've come up with is you don't need a minimum wage, you need minimum skills.
Yeah, that's good.
And when you have skills, you can command good wages in the marketplace, and then companies are competing over you. And that's a great scenario, provided the economy's not destroyed, which we're going to cover some of that stuff on the next podcast. Yeah. But I agree with what you're saying. And I think we can agree on the principle and the kind of the 50,000 foot view. And I think there's a lot of details that, for example, I don't know that it should be free. Maybe it's government funded, but it's based on your attendance. It's based on, you need to earn it along the way in one way or another.
Well, I would cut it off at those. I mean, you're only going to get paid you're only going to get 2 years.
2 years.
So if you
don't
vouchers. Finish it, then it's on your own. And so, yeah, there might be some people who just fall off the wagon and they did, half of community college and never finished.
Sure.
You're going to have some of that. But then there's also going to be people that think, golly, I'm like 6 months from finishing, my plumbing certificate, whatever they need for these certifications. And they're going to be like, well, now I'm going to have to pay for it myself. And you're going to start seeing people go, you better get that done in 2 years or you're going to have to pay for it.
I like that. I just think that when people get stuff for free, I don't think they value it. And I saw this in the military when you had the military barracks. I mean, you're talking about military people. I mean, generally speaking,
Sure.
pretty good crowd. But you see the military barracks and they weren't in the best shape. And it's almost like a project in a lot of cases. And I just think if it's free, people don't appreciate it. And so I would just like to see criteria being met by
like
the individual.
Grades or something where
Grades,
it's more merit honor
attendance.
Kind of thing. Right.
I think you just said the key word, merit.
Right.
You need to earn it along the way. Even if it's being given to you, you've got to do something to get it.
Right.
And then that way I think people naturally will appreciate it better. And if they stop doing what they're supposed to be doing, then they stop getting what they're getting.
Right.
Even though the opportunity's there, they just pissed it away.
Right. I don't think anyone should be able to fail 6 classes in a row and us keep
getting vouchers. Right.
I understand.
So we're on the same page.
Yeah.
And then
those are the details.
yeah. And again, it's just, I think we're on the same page at the 50,000 foot view.
Yeah.
It's just kind of figuring out the details and working within human nature to make sure we're not wasting tax dollars.
Right.
And then the last one you had there, or was that?
The last one, the 5th one would be related to healthcare. So kind of a twofold area of that. And one of those kind of relates back to that kind of crime issue of why are we seeing all of these gun violence situations? And it seems like it's increasing in our country. And how can we help that situation? I think mental health care is something that is lacking. As an ER nurse, I see where we have so many holes in the system when it comes to mental health. And specifically, you think about preventative care. So we go to the dentist, you go about twice a year to have a cleaning. That's to prevent cavities. And then you go to your primary care doctor to have a checkup, and that's to catch, healthcare conditions early. And I think that if we had some kind of mental health counseling, there was maybe a yearly evaluation, a mental health counselor might say, you have uncontrolled pain. We need to get you to a physical therapist, or send you somewhere, or maybe even a psychiatrist, send you somewhere where we can catch these things early and we can dig into what's going on in someone's life in their mental health care.
Right.
And do some preventative there.
100% agreement. And so many of these shootings, by the way, I do like to say that shootings are actually, the thing about shootings, and I'm very pro 2A, but the shootings, a lot of information I've read, shootings are actually on the decline population-wide in the United States, which you would think that watching the news. But again, the news has an agenda, most of it, and the news is gonna, if it bleeds, it leads. It's bad news is gonna make the front page. But I think that if you look at a lot of these mass shootings, there were lots of red flags. Mm-hmm. There were lots of signs that something's not right with this guy.
Right.
The Uvalde shooter. I don't want to give his name, don't want to glorify the name, but, he had threatened to kill his grandmother. I mean, he had posted stuff on social media about shooting up the school. Like, there were plenty of signs there.
Why are we not stopping it?
Why is there not some type of mental health EMS jumping into those scenarios to where, we could have prevented a really bad scenario had we been more proactive and had more mental health resources for the community.
Yeah, I think that's great. I haven't even thought about a mental health EMS, and it actually kind of addresses that, figuring out whether they send a mental health professional or a police officer to a scene. And I do think that if we had people that are designated for those kind of items, and it's not even necessarily someone who's in what I call an acute need. It could be someone who just needs someone to come visit them and figure out what's going on to prevent something worse from happening. But I relate a lot of that. People say, well, again, you want to decrease the power of the federal government. You want to give power to the states. But in this situation, we're talking about safety. So when we talk about military, that's very much a federal government issue, and it talks about external safety outside of our country and internal safety within our country. And if we talk about mental health issues, that's more of an internal security issue. And so I think it is something that the federal government can get involved in, and I see so many gaps as a nurse. I think I can see where most mental health patients that have issues like that, they don't have good jobs with insurance, and a lot of them aren't even on Medicaid or Medicare. And so they don't have coverage, and so then they don't seek help. And so then there's all of these issues with that. So if we can really dive into how do we help mental health care in America, that's like a whole different segment of healthcare that just hasn't been talked about a lot nationally.
Well, so here's what you could do is, rather than adding another agency and more levels of bureaucracy, is that, based on your state, you get X amount of funds per year based on your population. And it's X amount per population.
Right.
And then it's up to the states to disperse it and manage it.
Right.
And maybe they're dispersing it to the counties based on population. And then the counties are dispersing it. So it's just cash flowing.
Right.
And then once it hits the local level, they manage it. Because Wake County can manage Wake County far better than Washington, D.C. can. There's no question about it. And it doesn't matter who's in charge, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's great. And they'll also know where to place a facility. If a facility needs to be built, that can be handled at the local level. And I think that we do need some facilities for acute and chronic needs for that kind of thing.
But just related to healthcare, I think it goes all back to this whole big federal government and quality healthcare. And so many people talk about expanding Medicaid or Medicare, and they're wanting to just make something that's broken bigger. And what I really want to be able to do is go in as a nurse. I talk to so many healthcare professionals, and even when it's Democrat, Republican, if we just stay on healthcare, we see the same problems. And I even had a friend who I used to work with in the ER years ago. We sat and had lunch, and we weren't even talking politics. She was like, I just want somebody that goes up there that understands the complication of how hard it's going to be to fix our system. Because uprooting everything and making it governmental healthcare, you're going to lose so many industries in there, and you're going to lose jobs, and it's going to affect the economy, and you're probably going to decrease the quality all at the same time.
Right.
But if you keep it the way it is, we're going in a bad direction when it comes to, again, these profits over quality patient care. You're taking away independence from the doctor-patient relationship. I think that there's so much that I really want to just dive into with Medicaid and Medicare and reforming things to make sure people are covered, and we see that people do have access to healthcare and quality healthcare. And so I think looking at what are the stipulations to qualify for Medicaid, it shouldn't just be an a income requirement. It should also be related to, well, are they working, a certain amount of hours and they're still not making enough money to pay for insurance? Well, there should be this looking at kind of the whole picture of the whole person. And that's challenging to do at the federal level, but I think that we can make federal qualifications that will apply to the states and how they enact things, where people are actually more covered, but you actually get quality health care because you can decrease regulation on the physicians.
Sure. And again, coming back to the principle is maybe the federal just deals with the money, and the money's issued out to the state based on population.
Yeah, they like their control right now. There's so many
Well, it's
Medicaid.
control.
If we eradicated the regulation of Medicaid and Medicare and only just gave money to the states to regulate that, that would be monumental.
That'd be great, right?
Yes.
I've always said is the like back when Obamacare was, the talk was out there and everybody deserves health care. And of course, Obama came and went, or I guess it's still here. I don't know. But there was millions of people still didn't have health care. And so it didn't even solve that problem, even Obamacare. But I had always said that one of my concerns is that when the government wants to give you something, it actually just means they want to take control of something, which the quality goes down. If you really wanted to give someone health care, you could just give them a tax credit,
Right.
for everything they spent.
Yeah.
And you
can't
get a
deduct it
raw
right now.
check back. So if you really wanted to give it to everybody, that would be one way of going about it. But they
Right,
would
I
never
like
do that because they want to control. And that's where, I don't want to control anybody. So that's the thing. We've got too many people want to control people, and that's where the agenda is. That's where the politics in a lot of cases, from my point of view, comes in, rather than just, hey, let's do what's good for citizens.
Right.
I don't need to control what John is doing down the street, or what pronouns he's using down the street. Just be a good human, John. And these are the public services you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
So wrapping up, you got 5 things. You mind just hitting the highlights of the 5 things for us?
Yeah, let's promote truth. I think that related to the worldview, I say God first, meaning that I believe that people are ultimately selfish. So we really need to bring the power down to the people, which goes right down to that.
And get away from censorship.
Right, get away from censorship, decrease the power of the federal government by getting rid of executive orders, give parents the choice in their children's education, and give us some quality health care that really covers more of the population than it does right now.
So those are the 5 biggest reasons to go to Courtney Geels for Congress.com.
That's right.
And join in the fight, volunteer.
Donate if you don't live in the surrounding
Donate.
areas.
Unfortunately, it is what it is. It takes a lot of money to run a campaign.
It does.
So getting the word out by reposting on social media is a great way to help out. Getting Courtney's information to some people that maybe are in a better position to do something if you're not right now.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of things you can do to help and get the word out. So we're getting ready to actually take a break and start another podcast.
Yep,
So
looking forward to
the
it.
3 biggest things that Courtney sees are concerns to voters right now. So thanks for joining us for another 5 Things podcast. We'll see you on the next one. Hello, this is Brian Smith, and thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more valuable content.